600 years ago, in a city of marble facades and quiet conspiracies, a family of merchants discovered how to move power without armies. They moved it with trust and with paper. The Medici financed popes, bankrolled princes, and transformed Florence from a marketplace into the motherboard of Renaissance power. They taught money to travel invisibly through letters instead of caravans, and to hide interest behind the language of piety. They invented the prototype of the modern financial system, long before Wall Street had a skyline. Their ledgers became the DNA of every central bank, every clearinghouse, every offshore account that exists today. They built cathedrals, paid artists, and wrote history with ink instead of swords. But beneath the frescoes and sermons was a deeper code, one that turned morality into mathematics. This is the story of how the Medici transformed faith into finance, how they built an invisible empire that still regulates the pulse of the modern economy, and how their formula, secrecy, leverage, and image, continues to rule Europe from behind its monuments. Because when money learned to move without being seen, the world became theirs. Florence, 1397, a city of artisans and rivalries. Narrow streets smelled of ink, metal, and ambition. Guilds ruled commerce, families ruled guilds, and rumor was a currency of its own. In this chaos, Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici rewired the logic of trade. He saw that wealth didn't depend on who mined the gold, but on who managed the flow. Caravans were risky. Thieves waited on every road. Storms swallowed ships whole. Giovanni created a safer substitute, the letter of exchange. Deposit coin in Florence, redeem it in Bruges or Rome. Value now traveled as words, not metal. The church forbade usury, yet demanded its tithes arrive faster. Giovanni solved the paradox. He disguised profit as fees for conversion and transport. His letters bore no interest, only pious purpose. But behind the ink lay arithmetic. He opened branches across Europe, Venice, Geneva, London, Rome, each semi-independent but synchronized. He built redundancy into the system. If one branch failed, another absorbed its debts. It was Europe's first distributed financial network, the 15th century equivalent of blockchain. Giovanni invested in record-keeping, in honest clerks, and in time. He taught his sons the family creed. Power hides best when it looks like service. By 1429, the Medici Bank had become Europe's most trusted vault, not because it held more gold, but because its word was good. Confidence became currency, and currency became control. Cosimo de' Medici inherited his father's formula and scaled it into strategy. He didn't conquer, he calibrated. He expanded branches, gave partners equity, and created a communication web faster than royal couriers. Harvest data, war rumors, and interest rates moved across mountains within days. Knowledge was money's most volatile commodity, and Cosimo controlled it. The church was still his greatest client. The papacy needed liquidity. The Medici provided it quietly. They advanced cash against future tithes and collected payments disguised as pious duty. Rome remained holy, but its soul was collateral. Cosimo's enemies saw danger in his subtlety. The Albizzi family accused him of manipulating politics and exiled him. Florence cheered for a moment. Then salaries stopped. Trade slowed. The entire city gasped. Without Cosimo, Florence was a body without blood. Within a year, they begged him to return. He came back as a citizen who refused titles. But control doesn't need crowns. It needs cash flow. He financed Brunelleschi's dome, the engineering miracle of the century. It wasn't just art. It was credit made visible. If Cosimo could orchestrate stone, labor, and mathematics into a structure that touched heaven, who would doubt his ability to manage a city's fortune? He lent to rivals, forgave debts publicly, and owned them privately. He placed loyalists in every council, shaped elections through credit, and turned politics into accounting. Cosimo ruled through dependence, the softest, strongest form of power. Cosimo's grandson Lorenzo inherited more than money. He inherited a myth. Florence worshipped him as a patron of beauty, the magnificent. He sponsored poets, philosophers, and painters. His table was diplomacy disguised as dinner. But glory spends fast. Lorenzo's generosity turned the Medici balance sheet into theater. The bank financed pageants, marriages, and palaces. Prestige replaced prudence. Branches in London and Bruges lent recklessly to kings. Wars in Milan and Naples froze payments. For the first time, the family that sold confidence began to lose it. Then came the Pazzi conspiracy. Easter Mass, 1478. Knives flashed beneath the dome Cosimo had funded. Lorenzo's brother bled to death at the altar. Lorenzo survived and crushed the plot, but the message was clear. Even invisible empires cast shadows. He responded with spectacle, festivals, patronage, grandeur. Florence glowed brighter than ever, but the accounts darkened. When Lorenzo died in 1492, his successors inherited palaces, but not prudence. 2 years later, the Medici were expelled. No armies invaded, arithmetic did. Credit collapsed, clerks vanished, doors locked quietly. The empire of trust ended not with rebellion, but with a balance sheet that refused to reconcile. Yet their methods endured, adopted by other dynasties, refined by other empires. Because once the world learns to run on paper, it never goes back to coin. The Medici innovations became Europe's new grammar of wealth. Double-entry bookkeeping allowed transparency across continents. Partnership structures localized risk. Early prototypes of limited liability. Letters of exchange became bills, bonds, and eventually electronic transfers. They didn't just invent a bank. They invented trust as infrastructure. When the Bank of England emerged centuries later, it institutionalized the Medici concept. Private credit fused with public authority to stabilize economies. A central bank is simply the Medici idea, wearing a government seal. Corporations inherited their other invention, moral camouflage. Cosimo built churches to legitimize profit. Modern CEOs fund foundations and museums for the same reason. Philanthropy, then and now, is the price of permission. The Medici's ultimate insight was leverage. Reputation buys time. Time buys forgiveness. Forgiveness buys survival. Their collapse taught the counter lesson. Even divine branding cannot outspend debt. When confidence breaks, the entire system shakes. Every financial crisis since, from the South Sea bubble to 2008, repeats the Florentine rhythm. Faith, credit, excess, correction, rebirth. The Medici didn't create capitalism, they patterned it. Every financial system today, from the Eurozone to Wall Street, runs on Florentine logic. We still trade promises instead of goods. Our wealth exists as notation, not metal. And like the Medici, modern financiers balance moral narrative with mathematical precision. When a bank sponsors art, it's repeating Cosimo's playbook. When politicians answer to donors, they're reenacting his counsels. When regulators defend market confidence, they echo Giovanni's first insight, that faith is liquidity. Europe's architecture of finance still follows their geometry. The Vatican Bank, the BIS in Basel, the ECB in Frankfurt, all share the same DNA, distributed trust networks sustained by reputation, secrecy, and ritual. Even the crises feel familiar. Debt ceilings, currency runs, austerity programs. They're secular versions of indulgent sales and papal defaults. The Medici discovered a truth too dangerous to forget. You don't need to rule people if you rule their perception of risk. That's why their ghost still lingers over Europe's institutions. Every treaty, every bailout, every fiscal pact is an echo of Florence, a negotiation between morality and money disguised as governance. The Medici palaces are museums now. Tourists whisper beneath ceilings once painted to impress kings. But the software they wrote still runs quietly beneath modern civilization. When you tap a phone to pay, you reenact Giovanni's first letter of exchange. When a politician calls for restoring confidence, he's channeling Cosimo's crisis management. When billionaires fund universities, they're laundering ambition through culture, a Renaissance habit reborn. The family's real invention wasn't the bank, it was scalable belief. They proved that trust could be industrialized, and once industrialized, monetized. Faith, in their hands, became infrastructure, and infrastructure, once built, becomes invisible. Every modern innovation, from credit cards to crypto, is another mask on the same idea. That value is whatever enough people agree to believe in. They turned morality into accounting, beauty into balance sheets, and faith into leverage. They built both cathedrals and markets, and taught the world how to worship both at once. The Renaissance ended, but their method didn't. It migrated into empires, banks, corporations, and algorithms. The players changed. The code remained. If Cosimo once whispered in marble halls, today he speaks in numbers that move silently between servers. Florence never died. It just became global. The Medici fell. Their vaults emptied, their line extinguished. But the machinery they built, belief turned mechanical, never stopped running. They proved that wealth isn't a pile of gold. It's a pattern of obedience. That power can survive revolutions, so long as it hides in systems people depend on. Every balance sheet, every digital wallet, every bond yield curve is part of their long shadow. Their invention wasn't money, it was consent. This is Empires of Finance, where we map how money built empires and how those empires still build us. Because history doesn't repeat, it reconciles. And the Medici ledger has never truly closed. If you could stand in their counting room with a quill in your hand, would you balance the books or rewrite the rules? The system rewards those who make faith operational. The rest of us just live inside its consequences.